Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Jesse. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on the $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino to get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. All right, so we have a sad and unfortunate episode today. We are going to be talking about the upsetting news that the Orioles had to DFA Craig Kimbrel. Now, Eli did an episode basically about this topic, foreshadowing what did end up happening in reality. Yeah, Eli spoke about it and basically came to the conclusion that there was a very good chance that Craig Kimbrel would be DFA'd by the Orioles, and that's exactly what's happened. So props to him for looking into his crystal ball that I think he put on the thumbnail, and for figuring this out. So it can't be that shocking of a decision because Craig Kimbrel has been so bad, um, you know, over the past couple months that he's been pitching. They DFA'd Kimbrel and they recalled Brian Baker from AAA. That was sort of the corresponding move. So Craig Kimbrel, yeah, as we all know, it's sort of been a tale of two halves for Kimbrel this year. In the first half of the year, there was sort of one minor hiccup, but he, you know, as Eli mentioned in the last episode, I had an episode where I was talking about how he got snubbed for making the All-Star game. Craig Kimbrel, the first half of this year, was incredible, and he seemed like a really good signing on behalf of the Orioles but recently he's been a completely different pitcher basically ever since July. So in the first half of the year, he had a 3.18 ERA, a 2.79 ERA, and a 0.96 ERA in April, May, and June. And then everything changed when we got to July. He had a 6.52 ERA, a 7 in July, a 7.27 ERA in August, and a 22.09 ERA in September. So things just sort of keep kept getting worse for him. He was never able to sort of recover or rekindle what he had put together in the first half of the year. It's unfortunate that he was not an all-star the first half of the year during the all-star game, because if he was, if this does end up being his last year in Major League Baseball, it would have been nice for him to go out or to have an all-star year in his final year. But that's just not how things ended up working out. And yeah, he's had a really rough time figuring everything out the second half. So just to sort of give some other stats that are sort of indicative of this really bad downturn that he's had. Um, the opponent's batting average against him in the first 3 months was 205, 097, and 152. And then in July, opponents were hitting 216. In August, that climbed to 265. And then in September, it has been an atrocious 389 hitters have been hitting against him. Um, and basically his whip has had corresponding numbers. He was incredible in the month of May when he had a whip of .62. which is elite. Um, and then and 124 the first month in April, and then June he had a 107. But then ever since that point, it got really bad. In July, 155. In August, 162. And then a really, really incredible 327 whip when he got to this month of September. Now, granted, it is in September, it is a limited, well, it's half a month, basically, of his performance through the month of September. So it's definitely not nothing. But of course, the innings pitched and everything like that are reduced relative to some of the other months that he pitched. Kimbrel started out the year as the Orioles closer, and then over time lost that job. And now, as we most of us, I think, know, it has now been Sir Anthony Dominguez that has sort of taken over as the closer. The Orioles were fortunate that Mike Elias did decide to go get bullpen help at the trade deadline. If he did not do that, I would be highly, highly concerned about where this Orioles bullpen would be at this moment in time. We would probably have somebody like Yennier Cano closing games out. And I did an extensive thing a while back talking about why that is not an ideal situation for him. But, um, you know, yeah, we are fortunate to be in a situation where we did not just rely on Craig Kimbrel sort of before the All-Star, I'm sorry, before the trade deadline. The warning signs were emerging. I think Mike Elias and the organization felt less sure that we would be able to count on him down the stretch. And they made an accurate assessment, went out, got bullpen help. And yeah, hopefully we'll see. But so far, the bullpen assistance that we've gotten at the deadline has been a good compensation for having Craig Kimbrel. Now, thinking about the contract overall, so this is probably, we signed him 1 year, I believe $13 million at the beginning of the year. There's gonna, he has an option for next year. Obviously, is not getting picked up, so the Orioles are gonna have to buy out, and I think pay another $1 million for the final year of the contract. Now, right, the money for this Orioles organization for David Rubenstein and company is not really a concern. And it's not something that we should be overly concerned about as Oriole fans. That our ownership group is as wealthy as possible. That's not really a concern. But if you're thinking about what the Orioles had in mind when went out to get Craig Kimbrel at the beginning of the year, the Orioles were hoping this would be our closer, this would be the replacement for Felix Bautista, and that Craig Kimbrel would be able to hopefully make an impact for the Orioles in the postseason. Now, I had reservations about that possibility and that sort of trajectory, especially when we consider he had a really problematic playoffs for the Phillies last year. Um, so, I was a little skeptical of this plan, but with limited options in the off season for bullpen help, etc., Craig Kimbrel and with Felix Bautista being down for the year, Craig Kimbrel made sense given the options the Orioles had at that moment in time. So, uh, in hindsight, it's not great probably to be relying upon a 36-year-old to be a guy that is going to be the lockdown closer for a team that is trying to win a World Series. But with that said, the Orioles knew at that time that was not necessarily the final outcome for what the Orioles were able to do, and they did go make trades at the deadline to assist the bullpen that have turned, as I was saying, out to be very, very beneficial and very helpful for this team. So, yeah, I think that a lot of Oriole fans have been startled, I think, by this drop off as far as Craig Kimbrel is concerned. I mean, the change has been so drastic for Kimbrel. And even just, I think even for like more casual fans, just via the eye test, you can see that this guy is not at all pitching well and is having real, real struggles, even getting three outs in an inning, right? So there have been multiple times where he's gotten the first out. He's even gotten two outs, and he has just been unable to demonstrate that he's able to pitch the complete inning and to retire to complete just a simple inning, right? um so I think that, yeah, when you're looking at these numbers, it's sort of hard to understand how a pitcher could be so good in the first half of the year and then so dreadful the second half. And really, I mean, you know hitters hitting against him in September were 389, hitting 389 off of them. So uh, I don't know, but I guess I haven't checked it. But uh, there's no hitter in Major League Baseball that is hitting 389. Probably I'd have to look at the stats to know exactly who is doing that this year. But this is like an Arias type. Better than an Arias average, right? So when an opposing hitter is coming in to hit against Craig Kimbrel, they all of a sudden become contact wise, average wise, the best hitter in Major League Baseball, right? So that is really, really alarming, especially when you think about sort of the overpowering and dominant nature that Craig Kimbrel has relied upon throughout his career. Craig Kimbrel is not a guy who relied on finesse throughout the course of his years. Not that he was not able to locate the ball in order to be as good as he is. He had to locate, don't get me wrong, but he's definitely not a finesse guy, right? It's not like he's a guy who is like a Bruce Zimmerman. No, he's a starter, so it's not an exact analogy, but Bruce Zimmerman has to be perfect in order to be effective. He has to pitch around the edges of the plate, stay out of the middle of the plate, etc. And Craig Kimbrel is not exactly like that. Craig Kimbrel is overpowering. There are many times he has 97 and he throws a fastball up in the zone and he says to the hitter, hit it, and I bet you can't catch it, right? Catch up to it, right? So the fact that he was so overpowering, then to turn into a guy who is not only it's not a command issue even predominantly, he's just getting hit around, right? So to see somebody go from really, really dominant, even in the first half of this year, which granted has not been his historical dominance but had a very good first half of the year, to completely falling off is pretty shocking. And I think Eli made a note about this in his last episode, that it really does feel like Craig Kimbrel's body is just giving out on him. It'll be very interesting to see what he decides to do in this offseason, whether he decides to just pack it up and call it a career, or whether he decides to give it another go. Now, I don't think he's going to get a 10 plus $1 million contract after this year that he's demonstrated with the Orioles, but I do think a team out there would be willing to take a chance on him, give him, 2 to 3 million, $2 to 4 million, and if things don't work out, to cut him by the end of the year, right? So this is obviously, in hindsight, this is sort of a disappointing outcome for this move. I think the Orioles were definitely hoping for more out of Kimbrel throughout his time. The Orioles were not paying $13 million to Kimbrel for half of a season of good work, right? We were thinking about the long term, we were thinking about the playoffs, and we were hoping that he would be the ninth inning guy and hold it down for the remainder of the year. If somebody maybe emerged as a ninth inning guy, then maybe he would be the eighth inning guy or something along those lines. But to be the closer and to fall so far down that you're not even a middle reliever anymore, that you've fallen so low on the depth charts that you turn into a situation where you end up being DFA'd, especially, for guys like, no disrespect to them, but Brian Baker and, these sorts of middle relievers that we have on the Orioles, really just demonstrates how big a drop off how big of a drop off he has experienced this year for the Orioles. And I think that you know, I think this situation is a good reminder that, nothing is guaranteed in baseball. We think about now granted he is 36 years old. There were, questions about him coming into the year, etc. Don't get me wrong. But we're thinking about, guys around the league, Shohei Ohtani putting up a 50-50 year, which is absolutely incredible. These things are never ever guaranteed. As we're seeing, Shohei is not pitching this year. So, Felix Bautista, keeping it a little closer to home, is not pitching this year. I mean, there's no guarantees that any of our guys, Kyle Bradish, we thought we were getting John Means back this year. He got injured again. His career is really in jeopardy. Um, I mean, Tyler Wells. So, and he doesn't even have like a note, and Kimbrel does not even have a noticeable injury that he got an IL stint for, right? It's literally just like he just lost it all of a sudden. So it's pretty startling, but things like this can happen in baseball. We did see this from the hitter's perspective, basically with Chris Davis, after we signed him to a giant contract, paying him, over $150 million. And he just fell off and forgot how, looked like, he just didn't know how to hit anymore as a hitter. So this kind of thing does happen, and especially if we're factoring in his age, there is, it is more understandable, I guess, from that perspective, why we could see something like this happen. But it is pretty shocking that, no sort of rest routine, or that the Orioles had 3 months, to try to troubleshoot this problem. Um, and especially with all his veteran experience, you would think, he probably hasn't been this bad before in his career, but he's had struggles in the past that he's been able to probably draw upon for guidance and for wisdom as to what to do in this situation. Him, the Orioles organization, working together, was not able to figure this out and help him sort of uh, recover, and not even to necessarily be a closer, but even to be a seventh inning guy or a sixth inning guy. Um, Inevitably this decision had to come. It was the right decision to make. The Orioles do have some games that are important coming up. It is important, the division is probably lost, but it is important that the Orioles maintain the 3 seed heading into the playoffs. So we do have, I'm sorry, we're not going to have the 3 seed, the 4 seed, I'm sorry, because the Astros are going to have the 3 seed. But it is important the Orioles have the 4 seed, so they get home field advantage when they play. It looks to be Kansas City in the first round. Hopefully, the Orioles will get some 2014 revenge in this playoff series if the Orioles do face the Royals. So uh, it was sort of out of the question this late in the year. I don't think, no matter how decently he had pitched, how decently Craig Kimbrel had pitched in his even if he had sort of pitched a little bit better his last two outings or something, I don't think there was a chance that he's going to make the playoff roster. So because the Orioles do have some critical games coming up that are important to win, I think, we sort of need to have the best roster moving forward. And Craig Kimbrel was entirely jeopardizing that. So I don't want to forget about the important role that Kimbrel did play for the Orioles in the first half of the year. Um, so he was a ninth inning guy. I think he did play a really, really important role because at the time we did not have Gregory Soto, we did not have Sir Anthony Dominguez. So, having a lockdown closer, more or less like he was at the beginning of the year, was really, really important. But at this point in time, the Orioles' hands were sort of forced, right? And especially after this disaster of a second half, there was no chance the Orioles were going to pick up his option, uh, given his age, given, just a variety of factors. It didn't make any sense for the Orioles to pick up his option. So that's why it makes sense for the Orioles to DFA him now so that they could try to get a semi-competent reliever heading into this final playoff push, quote unquote. Seemingly, we will be in the playoffs. It's not certain, but it's very probable at this point. But in terms of like positioning ourselves as well as possible for the eventual playoffs, is important, and we have to win some games coming up here against not necessarily easy teams. So yeah, this is really unfortunate. But in hindsight, it's unfortunate because I mean, this is a guy who, in all likelihood, has put together a Hall of Fame career. It's unfortunate because most of the time, what I hope for Major League Baseball players is that they are able to exit the game and Major League Baseball on their own terms. And that's not always possible for players. A lot of players get forced out of Major League Baseball. Even legendary players, Felix Hernandez, uh, at the very end of his career, was still trying. The Orioles signed him to make a push to make a Major League roster, and that sort of being able to walk out of Major League Baseball on your own terms is a gift for Major League Baseball players that really cannot be taken for granted. It will be interesting to see what Craig Kimbrel decides to do this offseason, whether he tries to find an arrangement with a team. Um, he's going to be taking a big pay cut relative to what the Orioles would have been paying him if he had theoretically pitched well enough this year and then had his option picked up. So he'll take a significant pay cut from that. But overall, hopefully, if things maybe he will be at peace for it. He's has a very accomplished career. Might be headed to Cooperstown, as I mentioned. He's won a World Series before. So we'll see. But yeah, definitely hoping for the best for him. But ultimately, yeah, the Orioles organization just had to move on. And I'm sure it's a difficult decision for someone like Brandon Hyde. I'm sure it's tough for the Orioles because I'm sure there's so many players and pitchers on that team that have so much respect for him and his career. So it's difficult to I'm sure it's difficult for everybody involved, including Kimbrel, of course, himself. So yeah, it's really unfortunate, but the Orioles' hands was sort of forced, and it sort of felt like this was coming, and this was more or less inevitable given how just the trajectory of his season has gone, unfortunately. So anyway, I will wrap up the episode there. Thank you so much for listening to the episode. Best wishes go out to Craig Kimbrel as he, moves forward in life or on the diamond. We don't know. We will see. So, good luck to him moving forward, and hopefully the Orioles can salvage something in this final week headed into the playoffs. So thank you all again so much for listening. You can follow the show. Feel free to give us a 5-star rating and a review. We have a YouTube channel. You can check us out over there. Just check out the Warehouse Podcast. Feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube, like this video. You can feel free to comment on any of the analysis of any of these videos with any thoughts, ideas, questions, etc. If you want to get in touch with the show directly, you can feel free to email us thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram, but mainly on Twitter @thewarehousepod. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Jesse, and go O's.